This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
GPS, how are you?
I'm well. How are you, Mark?
It's a beautiful Sunday morning in the neighborhood. I got no complaints. How about you?
Sure, let's go with that.
Okay, you've got that deadpan sardonic wit down to a science. So I'm going to jump right in because I'm fascinated by this week's story that has clicked. It is. Do you have the story handy of the Wisconsin judge?
Yeah, I don't necessarily have any media, but certainly I'm aware of the story, and you and I have been talking about it a little bit this week. The judge who attempted to thwart federal agents and ultimately got herself arrested as a result, right?
Exactly, and from a legal standpoint, it's a fascinating issue. So, the judge, I think, as the facts lay out, and obviously that's part of what will be fleshed out here, in her role as a judge, is alleged to have directed somebody out the back door so that the ICE agents couldn't arrest. Is that a fair summary of it, or did you want to give a little more detail? Because I'm just going to set it up so I can for the observations that I have.
No, that sounds about right. I mean, it's a judge in Wisconsin who apparently told federal agents who came in to arrest a person suspected of being in the country illegally to wait, and then facilitated getting that person, the person who was being searched for, out the back door of the courthouse. And they ultimately decided that she was thwarting their legal, their authority and their correct, they had all the correct warrants and everything. And they decided that she was going to be put under arrest for that. Is that your understanding?
It's my understanding as well. And it's a fascinating issue. So, and I've seen a lot of commentary on this that I hate to second guess people, but I would just say is flat out wrong.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of wild speculation on this as well. On you go on X and you can find all gambits.
Yes, I know, Twitter law or X law.
Sure.
But so there was, back in 1991, there was a judge, Ray Morales, in Los Angeles. I think at the time he was sitting in the Van Nuys court, former DA. Then as a Superior Court judge, he had a public defender who was his calendar deputy named Howard Waco. Howard Waco was, as most public defenders do, had a bruising caseload, was in another courtroom, and Morales, according to the opinion at least, and also the scuttlebutt at the time, because I remember the case vividly. In fact, I had cases before Judge Morales and really enjoyed him. He told the bailiff, basically, go get me Waco, drag him out of another courtroom. I don't care where he is, just bring him here. Which they did. The bailiffs apparently escorted Waco to his courtroom. Howard sued Morales. The district court, meaning the trial court level, he sued him in federal court. Federal court dismissed the case. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal reinstated the case. And then the U.S. Supreme Court, back in 1991, as I remember, per curiam, which means the court with basically without an argument, just reversed and remanded to dismiss the case. By the way, and why I mentioned that history is because there was a dissent, both by, I think it was John Paul Stevens, and by Scalia, joined by then Justice Kennedy. All three of those justices are no longer on the court. Now, they ruled that in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, that the judges have absolute civil immunity from lawsuits. So that has been, we're kind of an outlier when it comes to that. When I say we, the common law is, the Anglo-Saxon common law imported this idea of absolute civil immunity, the idea being you don't want to just sue judges and for whatever else. Then you have Right on the heels of that, years later by SCOTUS, you've got the Clinton case where Paula Jones sued then President Bill Clinton. Also, in that case, the unanimous court ruled a civil case could go forward, but made the distinction between civil and criminal. The Morales versus Waco cited cases that made that distinction. Didn't really address it. Now you've got, against that backdrop, the Trump presidential does he get presidential immunity decision that this court ruled upon that was excoriated on some fronts and not on others. Why do I say that? Because people may have to do some ideological contortions because inevitably what the Wisconsin judge is going to be arguing is that the absolute judicial immunity afforded or as articulated in Morales versus Waco, the case I just talked about out of Van Nuys, will shield her from being arrested. In actuality, the court has been very clear that there's this weird dichotomy that exists in the law where you've got absolute judicial immunity for civil, but not necessarily for criminal. And you've got that against the backdrop of Trump getting shielded for presidential acts from criminals. So this case, I believe, will probably wind its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court at some point, and maybe fairly quickly. And why do I say that? Also because it's the feds who arrested. So you've got that trial court, circuit court, U.S. Supreme Court ladder that you can go up rather quickly. Interestingly, Scalia in the dissent on Morales versus Waco, or the dissent from the summary reversal, said, why are we doing this? Why are we stepping in the middle of this? We should just deny the petition.
Yeah, I believe the quote from the dissent is a summary reversal is rare and exceptional disposition, usually reserved for the court for situations in which the law is settled and stable, the facts are not in dispute, and the decision below is clearly in error. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how he goes about, squaring that circle 20 or 30 years later. In this case, and we're talking about, for anyone who wants to go and search and read the case, the Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge Hannah Dugan, who is the judge in question here.
We have her picture up here of anything. I think they actually did one of the, the feds are great at this. Did they do a perp walk out of the courthouse as well?
They did, and I saw that on Twitter at some point. I don't necessarily have that ready at the moment, but this is her picture from a New York Times article, so I can throw that up because I do have that handy.
So I think there was also this past week another judge who was arrested under different circumstances. I want to say in New Mexico or Arizona. I could be wrong on that. I believe it was a border state. And
New Mexico, it was an ex-New Mexico judge, I believe, who was the headline I'm reading here from AP says ex-New Mexico judge arrested in case involving man suspected of being Venezuelan gang member.
Yeah. And apparently this was a handyman who the judge's wife had allowed to live in the casita in the back.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Arrested on evidence tampering for allegedly destroying a phone belonging to a tenant who had been accused of keeping guns at the property, a suspected member of a Venezuelan criminal gang.
Right. It's an interesting case. That one, you can distinguish the facts. I think the reason that made news was because it was a judge. However, as you indicated, I believe it was a retired judge and it was not in a judicial capacity here. So that would be distinguished. I know that there's been it's been conflated in a number of outlets, and I suppose understandably so, because judge and judge, but would appear to me to be completely different legal issues here, and on the issue of judicial immunity and absolute civil immunity versus criminal immunity.
Yeah, they appear to be very different cases, but I can see here from a variety of headlines that I'm reading as we speak here that it's certainly being purported to be much more related and similar than maybe they are in fact.
Right, and as an attack on the judiciary, and I know in California before I left, and I'm sure when I get back there, that's been a hot topic. And the problem is that I think there's going to have to be a discussion like we just outlined right now on the how far the absolute civil immunity goes into, the interesting thing about the Morales versus Waco case was that the court in its per curiam, the Supreme Court, had said it's not an analysis of like what happened on the act. It's an analysis of whether or not it was a judicial action. In Morales's case, ordering somebody to appear in front of his court was the judicial action, and that makes sense. In terms of the Wisconsin judge, I believe at least the initial inquiry is going to turn on, did she say, I want what was the act that she directed? Did she tell, for instance, the feds, wait, I have not finished with calling this case, which would seem to fall under a judicial action? Or did she try to stall them in some way and then do something that was a non-judicial action?
Right. In other words, if she was trying to carry out her judicial duties and telling them to wait to follow their directives, and under that heading, that would be a judicial act. But if she was trying to stall them and then facilitate somebody getting out the door and away from them, then that would not necessarily be under judicial cover, right?
Yeah, I think that is the present interpretation of Morales versus Waco. The reason I cited the dissents is because obviously on a 9-person court, you have, I don't know, I'd have to go back and take a look, but you obviously don't have Scalia. You obviously don't have Kennedy. They were dissenters. You don't have John Paul Stevens, and because he's retired. So you've got a almost completely different makeup on that court than you did back then. And you've got a court that has recently wrestled with the idea of criminal immunity for the executive. And the reason I keep citing that is because I think that is going to inform how they deal with this, because this will tee up a kind of a, I won't say raging debate, because I don't think it's raging, but a debate that has been going on, at least in academic circles, as to the extent of immunities for judges.
Yeah, and I think that's, while I understand your hesitancy to use the word raging, I think that is an important debate, because as the next few years unfold, that's a debate that's going to be central to, the powers that various levels of government have.
One of the interesting issues also in the historical debate about this is that a lot of academics and a lot of the issues that have come up in talking about or litigating the immunities that are afforded to judges, believe it or not, come up in the immigration judge context, because there are often complaints about the immunities that are afforded to immigration judges and what immigration judges are doing or not doing. And here you've got a case where it's arguably dealing with immigration, but it's not an immigration judge. And there's already what I would consider a raging debate on whether or not the administration and the separation of powers is being threatened, and whether there is a constitutional crisis in the offing, but in a different context, the context of orders being made to the executive branch or halting actions by the executive branch, and then whether or not the executive branch is going to honor the judicial orders.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds, because the power flows uphill. So I think that decisions here on judges are going to really inform kind of how the power is distributed in an upward manner.
So I also mentioned that because it's interesting that SCOTUS will, if and when they get this, is going to wonder about, I mean, you would just think human nature is such that, okay, I've got over here where I've got an administration that may or may not be honoring my orders. And then here is a state court judge in Wisconsin who is being criminally prosecuted under the immunity doctrine. And I don't know that you can parse those out. I think that there is a certain amount of there, but for the grace of God go I in the thinking of a judge as they're deciding these issues.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't exactly know how they're going to figure that distinction out, but it certainly will be interesting. The one other thing, as you sit in New York, as you referenced earlier, that happened this week was the not guilty plea of Luigi Mangione. I believe that you were walking around in the area of that courtroom. Has New York been a buzz? It's been very slow news in terms of out here in Southern California.
Yeah, I would, we have kind of a unique constellation of cases in the news right now. You've got Mangione, who they're now seeking the death penalty on. You've got Scott Peterson, which got quite a bit of play because the LA Innocence Project has filed a voluminous document in the Court of Appeal asserting his innocence and asking for a new trial.
For anyone who wants to hear three people shouting at each other constantly for 41 minutes, by all means, check out Two Angry Men, because Mark and Harvey had on Nancy Grace. And God, that was, maybe that's just not my kind of media, but God, the two of you just shouting at each other for 41 minutes was something else. It's a good listen. Don't get me wrong, but it's hard to listen to.
I was gently reminding her that her career actually started, I mean, for the history of it, back in the late 90s, and then going into 2000, she was kind of the fill-in for Barbara Olson. And Barbara Olson was then a commentator married to Ted Olson, who recently passed away, who was the Solicitor General. And Barbara had a career as a second career, if you will, as a legal commentator. And I used to spar with her, if you will, on CNN. And then she passed away in the 9/11 attacks. In fact, on the jet that, as it was going down, had called Ted and told him about it. She was on her way to LA at the time, actually, to do Larry King and to pitch a show, I think, at the same time. I had talked to her about it right before, a couple of days before. Nancy kind of took her role after that and kind of then parlayed that several years later and during the Peterson case into a illustrious career and helped me coin the phrase of bleach blonde former prosecutor. And I had deja vu all over again with her screaming and not listening, and me doing the same, fighting like an old married couple.
Yeah, that 90 seconds where you were talking about that anecdote that you just told was about the only time that you got to speak without somebody shouting over you in the whole podcast. So that was endearing. I enjoyed that part. But the part where she just wouldn't let you get a word in edgewise and just kept shouting about the double with cheese. Nancy, I'm sorry, but as a Californian, double means 2 meat, 2 cheese. You don't say with cheese after. Shut up. Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, but Nancy Grace is just not my kind of media. I respect her, and I think she's very talented, and she's clearly who she is because she's been playing the same. I almost say character, but it's clearly not a character. That's clearly who she is, but she's been the same person in media for 30 years now, and listening to her shout about the same nonsense while someone who I respect quite a bit is trying to make salient points at the same time was tough for me.
So I'm going to, as we sign off here, we didn't do comment of the week, but the first person who posts what a 4x4 is in the in and out context, we will send swag to this week. How's that?
Sure. No problem. I mean, that's not exactly, you're not setting the bar too high, but yeah, let's do it. If the first person who screws it up, I'm going to block from this YouTube channel forever.
About the first person who's not a Californian who recognizes that, huh?
Well, I mean, 10 years ago, that might have been something, but first person who lives in a state that doesn't have an In-N-Out. Okay. How about that? Because, now that they're in Nevada and Arizona and soon in Nashville, the bar is getting lower and lower. But yeah, if you can figure out what a 4x4 is and show me that you live in, Minnesota, then we'll talk.
I love it. GPS, I'll see you this week. Thank you. You're kicking ass.
Look forward to it, Mark. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast.